on the presence of heavy metal in some products in the market was a cautionary statement. Investigations are ongoing to establish the presence and quantities, if any, or in the various commodities seized by the MUT agency across the country. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, the committee observed 95% of the imported sugar during the duty-free window was brought through the port of Mombasa, and it was cleared by the various relevant agencies. And the remaining 5% found its way through our porous border. Few recommendations, Mr. Speaker. The committee recommends that the multi-agency team should expedite their investigations into the matter and avail conclusive evidence on the same. 2, the committee recommends that the Border Management Committee be reconstituted to provide sufficient safeguards. 3, the committee further recommends that border surveillance team be facilitated to enable them conduct their work effectively. Mr. Speaker, the process of clearing sugar is done by 6 bodies. The Kenya Revenue, for them to collect tax. The Kenya Bureau of Standards for quality. The Port Health for food security, for food safety. Sugar Directorate on licensing. Radiation Protection Board for safety. And Kenya Ports Authority for logistics. Mr. Speaker, KEBS issued the following conditions to regulate the importation of bulk sugar, because the issue that we have in the country is about the bulk sugar. The conditions were that the sugar was to be, 1, bagged at the point of entry in marked bags and transported to the factories for further processing before the packaging for retail. The committee observed that certain companies failed to comply with the outlined conditions. In A, transporting the sugar in open trucks. Mr. Speaker, a lot of sugar was transported in open trucks, storing the sugar under unhygienic conditions, exposing the sugar to contamination by handling it using machinery used by other industrial purposes. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion also, these matters are under investigations, and releasing some of the names might also jeopardize the investigations that are going on. The sugar imported is pre-inspected by KEBS, appointed agents, and issued with COCs into the country. The committee also observed, Mr. Speaker, that all sugar imported legally within the duty-free importation window had the requisite clearance from the country of origin and KEBS. Due to poor handling and storage condition, the sugar is likely to be contaminated due to its hygroscopic nature. The committee further received a presentation from the Ministry of Health indicating that some of the sample table the complete report, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I move. And I beg to table, Mr. Speaker.
Well, first of all, before I allow very few comments, You see, the House must also remember that it is the House that demanded a progress report within the period that the House was going to be sitting. And the House, having altered the calendar last week so that it goes to recess at the rise of the House today, you must also bear the consequences of every decision that you take. So you've been given the progress reports. It's up to you to make what you may of it. But remember, it is just a progress report which you demanded. So, comments, Leader of Majority.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday morning at the time of the private members, we urged members that we should stop this idea of bringing motions that urge and replace it with a motion that says the House resolves. So, Speaker, I am a very sad man. Speaker, we have given a committee, a joint committee, used public resources for over 2 weeks, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the kind of recommendation, Mr. Speaker, I'm seeing here, Mr. Speaker, even in some county assemblies, such recommendations are not found. Mr. Speaker, this afternoon, at least this afternoon, we expected one definite answer from this committee, that the sugar that the Kenyan citizens are consuming has no mercury. Only that alone. Mr. Speaker, if you protect me, Mr. Speaker, in fact, Mr. Speaker, let me read that recommendation. The recommendation that people are shouting about is that so far, from the preliminary test and ongoing analysis, no traces of mercury has been found. However, Mr. Speaker, we have gone to school. However, investigations on the same are ongoing. Mr. Speaker, that is not conclusive. Speaker, the sentence from the beginning of however, the moment you have used the word however, Mr. Speaker, the moment you say however, investigations on the same are ongoing, Mr. Speaker, the question as to whether mercury is found in the sugar in the market is not conclusive. And Mr. Speaker, under your leadership, we owe our allegiance under the Constitution 94, 95, 96 to the people of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, number one, the citizens are in limbo. They don't know what to consume. The importers, Mr. Speaker, people who have put their money in sugar don't know what is going to happen to the investment. Mr. Speaker, this House cannot take this kind of decision. Mr. Speaker, and I have nothing, Mr. Speaker, because Honorable Lesuda asked a specific question, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, members should be given the statement sought by the member. She asked us a definite question. Is the sugar in the market safe? 15 days down the line, Mr. Speaker, the sugar is however. Number two, Mr. Speaker, there is a recommendation here again that if the answer to the members was definite, there is a recommendation here that all the sugar in the market, even the one that Honorable Duale's mother has in her house, must undergo test. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it's ridiculous. It is not, it can't happen that every kilo of sugar in our country must undergo test. Mr. Speaker, Parliament does not act in vain. Parliament has the teeth to bite. Mr. Speaker, if revenue was not collected by Kenya Revenue Authority, Mr. Speaker, you have the Gazette notice. You know when the window was closing. If there is importer X and Y who imported sugar outside the window, this committee must say it clearly that so and so did not pay duty. This is the amount. He must pay it. Mr. Speaker.
Can we, no, just a minute. Leader majority, try to be,
yes,
to take as little time as possible.
Okay.
You can see there are so many people.
Yes.
I am not able to tell whether they are standing because of the effects of what they may be consuming or whatever.
So,
but
Mr. Speaker,
be that as it may, please.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, I have raised two questions, and I'm sure my colleagues will have a chance to raise. One, Mr. Speaker, it's very sad that today, this afternoon, we do not have a definite answer whether the sugar we consume has mercury or not. Secondly, we have not confirmed and we have no definite answer whether there was tax evasion, and if it was so, who evaded, by who, and by how much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader Minority, now, honourable members, I will now limit, because this is not one of those on which you have resolved about the time each of you will take. 2 minutes maximum. Yes.
Thank you,
Honourable
Mr. Speaker.
members,
Mr. Speaker,
there's a
I
lot
hope,
of other business.
I hope you're quiet enough to allow me to utilize my 2 minutes. Mr. Speaker, first of all, it should be understood that sugar industry has employed thousands and thousands of Kenyans. It is a matter, when I went to the village last weekend, Mr. Speaker, people are asking me whether they should take sugar or not. The economic implication of that is that many people are not buying sugar as we speak. Those of us who come from sugar belt areas, we are not happy. And so, Mr. Speaker, just 2 things. Number one, this matter did not just come out of the blue. There are Kenyans who told us that there is mercury in some sugar. What the committee should have done was to zero in on these people. Ask them where that sugar is, which has mercury. If those people are supposed to avail the sugar with mercury or without mercury, then the committee determines that the sugar that was spoken about does not have mercury. And that is the report we expected here. What the committee should have asked us, Mr. Speaker, and 2 of them, was to extend time to investigate beyond the sugar that was presented to them. But, Mr. Speaker, listen to the committees. It is just a joke. This report is just a joke of the highest order. The committee even talks of reprocessing sugar. The committee even talks about, Mr. Speaker, finally, as I see it, that those who imported sugar during the period of the window which the minister gave, or the cabinet secretary, should pay taxes. How? And the cabinet secretary exempted sugar from taxes. So, Mr. Speaker, to me, to be honest, there is no need to even give these committees any extra time. This work has defeated them. Let us either rely on other investigative organs, or we create an ad hoc committee of this House to deal with this matter. Thank you.
Honourable members, the Honourable Naisula Lesunda, can you retrace your statement? Do you have the same statement? Yes. Please just read it out for this member, so that we also don't comment out of context.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To save on time, I'll read the statement as it is.
Exactly.
Honorable Speaker, it is alleged that the sugar is unfit for human consumption as it contains mercury and copper, and that are believed to have adverse effects on the human health. It is no wonder that even the rising cases of cancer should be attributed to this. Mr. Speaker, the killer trade is not only dangerous to the health of many Kenyans who are already victims, but also impacting negatively on our economy through loss of millions of shillings, through evasion of the Kenya Revenue Authority, KRA taxes, by the owners of the illicit trade. Honorable Speaker, it is against this background that I seek statement from the chairs of the said committees on where the contraband sugar is coming from. How has it been cleared at the ports of entry? Who is the importer, and whether the sugar was inspected prior to consumption? How the package of the contraband sugar acquired Kenya Bureau of Standards stickers, given that most shopkeepers still have this contraband sugar in their possession? What are the disposal plans, if any, and measures in place to ensure the disposal mechanism is not hazardous to the environment and human health? What measures are there in place to ensure that the foodstuff in the market is safe for human consumption, and whether there is any arrest that made to those behind this illicit trade? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So, honourable members,
Can I say
the question sought by the Honourable Lesunda has many faces. And you members yourselves here, you said it cannot go to one committee. But several of you said that it can almost touch 5 or so committees. But we determined that since in any event, even if it went to 10 committees, we are not taking the expert advice of the Honorable Pukose or the Honorable Nyikal, obviously. So they are all members, you are all members. None of you is going there to say that now I'm going to say I've examined this or I tasted, like I've heard people saying you taste with. So we zeroed in on the 2 committees and agreed, let them be the lead to fight in order to respond to the issues raised by the Honorable Lesunda. So there are quite a number of them. But more importantly, is whether the commodity that is in the market is safe for human consumption. I think that was a primary concern to many of you who contributed here. Now, you can't inform me, you have no capacity. Is it Honorable Sankok? You have no capacity to inform. Just relax. So, honourable members, what I think you are saying, listening to both the leader majority and the leader minority, what has been submitted today, because the report says the tests so far conducted, shows no trace of mercury. It says, however, there are ongoing investigations. Now, I don't understand. It is not, how long does it take to test? And if it takes this long, for agencies concerned to give you conclusive information, then they just should point to incompetence. Do they then have capacity to even clear it and test it at the port of entry? Because there it will come in tons. So what does this mean? When you say Honorable Kanini Kega and maybe Honorable Chair of Agriculture, when you say, however, there are some ongoing tests or investigations, are you talking about investigations or tests? We need to know, because you can go ahead and deal with other matters, but this issue of health, the issue of health is important. The House and the country needs to know, particularly that aspect of health. Then you can deal with those other issues of tax evasion, contraband, and all. At all. Honorable Kanini Kega or the Chair of Agriculture? Yes, Chair of Agriculture. No, just a minute. This is important. Let's get this one.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just want to reinforce what my co-chair had presented to this Honorable House. And with all due respect, to our majority leader and those who have dissenting voices, I think they should have first listened very carefully to the report. And only after listening to the report, then you make those valuable comments which now you are making. But having said that, the issue of whether the sugar in the country is laced with mercury or not has been answered in our report. But the item, however, is as a result of so many other samples which continue to come to KEPS laboratories and which need to be tested. We cannot conclusively say, and we are not even sure those other tests, those other samples that are going to be brought.
a question that I asked also when I went to sit with the committees, and I asked the relevant authorities, and we still need an answer for it. Apart from the sugar, which they have only sampled at the warehouses and at the, in bulk, can the relevant authorities find out about the sugar on our shelves in our supermarkets and tell us whether the sugar, because the rest, I mean, it's just out there in warehouses and now,
conclusively bring a report. The leader of the majority is the one who said, no, we can't give you more time. You have to bring a report by Thursday. We are relying on other agencies. We are relying on other agencies to provide information for us. Unless you are looking for a specific answer, or certainly you have certain interest, it is very, very unfair to even condemn us, saying that this report does not even qualify to be in a county assembly. This is, I think the leader of majority should actually apologize, or even declare the interest that he has in this, because we have done, honorable members, Mr. Speaker,
Yeah?
when I was giving this preliminary report, I said it's just to appraise members where we are. But we are going to give more information, more comprehensive information within 2 weeks. I don't understand why the leader of majority is steering our report before we even present the final report. It's very, very unfortunate, and I think you should also apologize.
Well, but let me just, I don't know whether members really appreciate. A progress report is never really, on a day like today, is never even sub-material for debate. It is for information. And for correction. No, Honorable Pukose, you are out of order because you don't even know. It is for information, not for correction, as you are saying. Because there is information given, the only reason why it is progress is because the committee is still working. It is work in progress. But it is important that the committee also hears the feelings of members. But that cannot be the business. That's not the business for this afternoon. So I will only allow. No. The moment you start shouting from where you are seated, I will obviously not even look at you. I will allow the honorable member for Seme. No.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we are missing the whole point. There are two main issues here. There is the health aspect of this problem, and then there's the trade and the taxes and the illicit issues. Mr. Speaker, I voluntarily attended the meetings as a friend of the committee, and I share some of the sentiments that have come here. And I came to the conclusion that the important aspect will be lost, and it looks like it has been lost. Mr. Speaker, I say that because the question Honorable Lesuda asked is one of the issues. What is in the market? Obviously, the sugar that was confiscated as tested is confiscated. It is not in the market. So it is not our worry. And I think the members that were there when I was there, I didn't go back because it didn't look and lead, it cannot be ML. It could only be MG. most likely. So again, the units of measurements that were being given, the committee should check. Thirdly and finally, Mr. Speaker, I think as the committee is progressing with the work, it would be better to probably get a subcommittee of that and sit down with the technical issues of the safety of the sugar and get the Ministry of Health more involved in this. Mr. Speaker, that is my concern.
Well, you know, in Swahili language, they say, panapo wazee haliharibiki neno. Well spoken. So this thing, when you engage in hugging, that's why you lost the plot. You know, you went off tangent. The issue of health appears not to have received sufficient consideration. And I'm pointing out these issues because I'm about to give certain directions about how these matters should be handled. Because this thing of telling us, I don't know, or you are going to, I don't know, are you saying you are going to factories, I don't know, you're going to go downs, all this is not addressing the issue. Even if you go to Namanga border point, just with your naked eyes, I mean, what are you going? Then what report do you bring that about the health of Kenyans or the suitability of the product? Member for Imenti South, I will not allow the member for Mumias East, the majority whip, yes. So please allow other members who may not be conflicted to make. Let me get the member for Imenti South who appears to be also. Is it the sugar you have consumed or what is it?
No.
If it has some of those substances, it can easily cause anxiety.
Thank you, Honorable
Proceed,
Speaker.
Honorable Kaduri.
And Mr. Speaker, I personally voluntarily many years back stopped taking sugar. Maybe I knew there would be such a problem in the future. Honorable Speaker, I don't want to digress on this matter. I want to comment on the health issue which Honorable Nyikar has alluded to. Honorable Speaker, the Minister of Health appeared before the committee armed with a lot of information. And the Minister of Health, in their submission, they said the sugars they have tested, 174 samples, have no traces of heavy metals. Heavy metals, for those who are not chemists, are minerals like lead, mercury, copper, arsenic. They said the only problem they detected in the 174 samples of the speaker is the results that there is no mercury, absolutely no mercury. Myself, personally, as a member for South Imenti, I was at the pains because they had denied Kenyans information, Mr. Speaker. And Honorable Speaker, this committee has really worked on. Let me commend them. Honorable Speaker, within that period of 10 days, you know, once a committee is engaged in investigations, we highly rely on the evidence that we get from our witnesses. If the witness gives
Honorable Kaduri, don't, you're still the one on your feet, but just also try to make members understand. The 174 samples.
Yes, Honorable
Is there an indication as to from how many counties they had been taken?
Yeah, the actual table on the list, Honorable Speaker.
Please, because it has not come out. You know, it is important.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Mutunga.
Please, you can comment on that.
The sample from Nyando was tested in Kisumu Government Chemist, and another sample from Ondolet was tested in Kisumu Government Chemist. Honorable Speaker, these are 16, 17 counties, 18. The 18 counties, Honorable Speaker.
So
and
the
that sample
174
is really representative.
So, Honorable Kaduri,
yes,
you see, the point raised by the Honorable Nyikal is, it is time to what I'm trying to get a clarification on. that, yes, they told you 174 samples.
Yes, Honorable Speaker.
And out of those 174, 60%.
Yes, and higher moisture content. But
Yes.
you know, not
And
heavy.
therefore not fit for human consumption.
And yes, they declare that it is not fit for human consumption, and they say they have already seized. They have already. They are still continuing with the sampling, more samples in all the counties. They have officers on the ground testing, and very, very busy indeed, 24 hours. And by next week, they'll be able to table all the results in all the counties, Honorable Speaker.
Very well. Now you have responded. That becomes clearer.
Any other issue, Honorable Speaker?
No, I'm more concerned about the issue raised by the Honorable Nyekal because it touches that point. Now, in the normal way of doing things, you distribute them. No. Geographic, because we are going to. I'm just about to end this discussion. The member for Wajir. Sugar is consumed in almost every corner of this republic.
Chairman.
It is not about people from sugar can grow area. That's why I don't remember from me. Yes.
I want to remind Honorable Junet that one of the counties mentioned include Wajir County. Mr. Speaker, I think what we are witnessing is that when we have joint committees, then the expectation probably of the members is that there will be rich ideas. And that is why you can find members uncomfortable probably with the report. But for a fact, I think the scope of issues raised by Honorable Lesuda was big. And based on that, I expected the members probably to rank and first ensure that they provide a satisfactory answer to some of these issues. The key being, as you have correctly put, the issue of health. Is the sugar fit for human consumption or not? Once that is well answered, then the rest will be secondary issues that the other report probably can address. We want to appreciate that the aspect of taxes and all that can come at a later stage. We must have proper priority ranking of our assessment reports such that we can advise on issues properly. Mr. Speaker, I want to appreciate that this is a progress report, and a progress report probably is not expected to cover everything. It is only expected to provide the preliminary findings. I want to also appreciate the fact that the joint team were not very clear on issues of whether whether it was fit for consumption or not. Secondly, the deliberations we will make here will send fears to our constituents. We must be very careful. When we are saying, for example, sugar at Wajir or Mandera is not totally fit for consumption because of presence of moisture and all that. So, Mr. Speaker, my request is that we give this committee some more time to exhaustively engage all the stakeholders and come with and share a conclusive report that will give us direction. At this juncture, let's not condemn them, but give them more time to share exhaustive report on the issue. Thank you, Speaker.
In fact, we called experts and tell them, if you go to the shelf and pick two brown sugars, there's something called raw sugar and something called brown sugar. Brown sugar is generally the table sugar. But you say you cannot differentiate from the eye, Mr. Speaker, sir. The issue here is we rely on chemists and rely on the government chemists. They told us they are overwhelmed by the number of chemists. We give them about 1 week or two to conclude, to give us more data. We want to give Kenyans actual information based on scientific data. Let us not just have mob psychology here, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Well, honourable members, if we proceed this way, we can be here until, yeah, somebody has just said something about cows coming back home to roost or chickens coming home to roost. Honourable members, I can see the level of interest and everybody is giving this, another one will give the other. Let me distill what I think it should be of concern. Health as first priority. And the committee, forget, I don't want to hear about sugarcane growing. This is not about sugarcane growing only. So I can see members from sugarcane growing areas, everybody wants to, we are not, is health. The safety of, or suitability of the sugar in the shelves. So that I don't think whether, you can see now, if you go to, you are going to visit Namanga, you are going to visit Webuye, you are going to board in the 11th Parliament. Again, that's not the responsibility now of these two committees. The responsibility of the committee chaired by the Honorable Ole Kenta, Moitalel Ole Kenta, Committee on Implementation. So they are the ones, that is the committee that should now, carrying that report, which was adopted by the House, we should be calling now those others you are hugging or doing whatever you are doing with. Yeah? So can we get this committee to address the issue of the safety of the sugar in the shelves? Whether the contamination is through moisture content or presence of whatever other substance, be it tobacco or mixing with the sand or whatever else. Please, we want to know, is it safe? That's what Kenyans want to know. Yeah, so that, please don't, because this, the moment you get into so many of these issues, you get conflicted. Obviously, you get conflicted, and it will be very difficult for you to come up with a report that really addresses that issue of health. Since, according to what both Honorable Kanini Kega and Honorable Kaduri Murungi have said, and I think that's the same thing which the Honorable Professor Tuitoek, or the member for Mogotio, has been saying, since the issue is, you say that the sugar that has been imported was massive in quantities, then the instruction should be to the relevant ministry to undertake countrywide sampling and report, so that when you come and say, you say 60% of 174, it's in itself really not enough, because you have learned the number of counties from which those samples were taken, 18. So it's really small. Given that sugar is distributed throughout the country. Yes, the committee, it is a committee, the membership demand that the committee and to give a progress report. They did not give a complete report. It was never intended to be a complete report today, which can form the basis of debate. My direction is, through the clerk, instructions to the relevant ministry and or agencies to provide the committee with evidence indicating the safety of the sugar in being sold in the country. Throughout the Public Accounts Committee will want to know why sufficient taxes were not collected. Of course, using the reports from the Auditor General. So that then the Committee on Trade perhaps can deal with the issue of policy. What policy exists in the country with regard to importation of such commodities. Because it looks like whenever a window of opportunity arises, the country is just flooded with all manner of imports. But so that, please, so that we can also be specific in responding to the points raised by the Honorable Suda. You will go to the committee and inform them, since you have been a friend. But you also indicated that you realized that your friendship was not being useful, and you withdrew the friendship. But now you can reinstate the friendship, because I know you go to offer professional advice. Let the committee, for the time being, address that issue of health. Of course, it's not, that's because if the moment we begin digressing, we are not helping Kenyans. The issue of concern to under 95(2) is the safety of Kenyans. So, joint committee, joint chairs, address the issue of safety. Address the issue of safety. When the House resumes, we want a report that tells us what is the truth, what is the correct position. Not 60%, even if it's 60%, give us, but from the entire country, not from 18 counties. No, let the committee don't go to taste with your tongues. I know you have not been doing that, but at the risk of doing what some other people are saying to have done, please, take the reports. Question the people providing you the reports. Test the veracity of those results. Then give us a report. After that, we've been, take the statement from the Honorable Suda, distill it, and go to the area that concerns safety. No, you can't protect. You see, this is the problem. Read your standing orders. What is your background? What's your background? You can't inform who now? Honorable Nyikal, should you feel that there is an issue that you want to go and share with the committee, please appear there so that we can put an end, because there are so many of you who want to speak to this. We cannot be able to do anything else if we just continue this. So the committee should focus on that and bring a report, but try to distill the issues raised by the Honorable Suda. You want to say something, Kanini Kega?
Mr. Speaker, I start guided, and we will do that. Mr. Speaker, I remember we even requested Honorable Lesuda to also be part of the team. We also did the same to Majority Leader, but none of them came. Yeah, so Mr. Speaker, we did. Yeah, I did. I remember telling you formally. So, Mr. Speaker, even when I stood here the other time, we were seeking for more time. So once we get that extra time that we want, I can assure this House and the nation that we are going to give a comprehensive report. Mr. Speaker, as we sit here, we are even seeing news that there are even other seizures that are going on. Yesterday, there was, I think, in Isli, today in E10. So this is a continuous process. But I want to assure the House that in 2 weeks, or by the time we resume, definitely we will have a definite report for this House, Mr. Speaker. We take the business of the House very, very seriously, and we are going to provide all the necessary information, Mr. Speaker, that is required as per the mandate of this House, Mr. Speaker. And we will do that. Start guiding.
Very well. Matter is put to rest. The Honorable, this member who is raising his hand up. No, you can't. Obviously, just continue sitting and raising your hand, but with next order. If you want to remain with the hands up.
Order number 8, Motion.
This is the plenary, not the committee, you know. Here we must follow the rules strictly.
Order number 8, motion, extension of the period for consideration of nominee to the office of chairperson of the Public Service Commission.
Chairperson, Honorable Koinange, very brief.
Thank you. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that pursuant to the provisions of Section 13 of the Public Appointments (Parliamentary Approval Act 2011) relating to extension of period for consideration of nominee for appointment to a public office and paragraph 6 in bracket 1 in the first schedule to the Public Service Commission Act, this House resolves to extend the period for consideration of the nominee submitted by His Excellency the President for appointment to the office of Chairperson of the Public Service Commission by a further period of 14 days from 19th July 2018. Honorable Speaker, I will ask Honorable Wachira Kavinga to second. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Member from where?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I support. Thank you.
Order members. Those of you, Honourable members, I propose the question, which is that pursuant to the provisions of Section 13 of the Public Appointment Parliamentary Approval Act 2011, relating to extension of the period for consideration of nominee for appointment to a public office, and paragraph 6, public office and paragraph 6(7) in the first schedule of the Public Service Commission Act, this House resolves to extend the period for consideration of the nominee submitted by His Excellency the President for appointment to the office of Chairperson of the Public Service Commission by a further period of 14 days from 19th of July 2018. Obviously, Honourable members, because you know what is happening at the rise of the House, this was a necessity in this. So I put the question that pursuant to the provision of Section 13 of the Public Appointment Parliamentary Approval Act 2011, relating to extension of period for consideration of nominee for appointment to a public office, and paragraphs 6(7) in the first schedule to the Public Service Commission Act, this House resolves to extend the period for consideration of the nominee submitted by His Excellency the President for appointment to the office of Chairperson of the Public Service Commission by a further period of 14 days from 19th of July 2018. Will as many as that opinion say aye? Aye. As many as contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it.
Order number 9, motion, extension of the period for consideration of nominees to the offices of Chairperson and members of the National Gender and Equality Commission.
Honorable Joyce Coril.
Yeah, thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. I beg to move that, pursuant to the provisions of Section 13 of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act 2011, relating to extension of period for consideration of nominees for the appointment of the Public Service Office and other Section 11(6) of the National Gender and Equality Commission Act, this House resolves to extend the period for consideration of the nominees submitted by His Excellency the President for the appointment to the office of the Chairperson and the members of the National Gender and Equality Commission by a further period of 14 days from 26 July 2018. Honorable Speaker, the reason why we are asking this is because the date is lapsing on 26th, and Honorable Speaker, we as a House, you are aware that the House is due to proceed on recess today. You agree with me that this House has been very busy for us. The committee has never had a break. We had a vigorous budget process to the second supplementary budget estimates 2018. Honorable Speaker, we don't want to give this important vetting process half-hearted attention. Let the members proceed on recess and come back fresh to dispense with this important matter. Honorable Speaker, the extension will also allow the technical team to carry out proper background checks on the 3 candidates to enable the committee make informed decision after proper analysis of the facts. Honorable Speaker, I therefore move and request Honorable Sangok to second.
Honorable Sankok.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. And as I raise to second, we should also be aware that as we chase the sugar in the safety of the sugar in the warehouses and in the shelves,
No,
let us also check the sugar
out of order. Never be irrelevant. If you don't know the motion which you have been asked to second, just say you don't. This is not. Honourable members, let me restate. I will administer the standing orders quite strictly. You can't rise in your place and start talking about sugar. This is a motion of extension of time. Unless you don't know. If you don't, you just say you have been ambushed or your mind was still within that other issue. Or you are affected by the... So if you don't know about this one, you know about it, and you know the reasons. Proceed.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. We need that extension of time so that we can scrutinize the names properly, because as a House, we need to give information to the House that are very proper. So, Honorable Speaker, I second the motion of extension. Mercury in our bloodstream is very dangerous.
Honourable members, I propose the question that pursuant to the provision section 13 of the Public Appointment Parliamentary Approval Act 2011 relating to extension of period for consideration of nominee for appointment to a public office and section 11(6) of the National Gender and Equality Commission Act, this House resolves to extend the period for consideration of the nominees submitted by His Excellency the President for appointment to the offices of chairperson and members of the National Gender and Equality Commission by a further period of 14 days from 26 July 2018. I put the question that pursuant to the provision of section 13 of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approval Act 2011 relating to extension of period for consideration of nominees for appointment to a public office and section 11, subsection 6 of the National Gender and Equality Commission Act, this House resolves to extend the period for consideration of the nominees submitted by His Excellency the President for appointment to the offices of chairperson and members of the National Gender and Equality Commission by a further period of 14 days from 26 July 2018. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many as the contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it.
Order number 10, Committee of Ways and Means, approval of provisional taxation measures for the financial year 2018-2019.
The Honorable Kajwang has a point of order.
I've not contributed to anything since the House began because I wanted to use my time properly for the motion that we are just about to enter into. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I have a point of order in terms of the propriety of this motion. This motion perplexes me for so many reasons, but for now I do not want to contribute on the merit, but I want to look at the way the motion has been drafted and brought before us. Mr. Speaker, sir, you see it is titled Committee of Ways and Means. That's where we begin. And the question I ask is, do we have a committee of means and ways? Ways and means. Mr. Speaker, sir, committees in this House is governed by Article 124 of the Constitution, which says that the House will establish committees and shall make standing orders for the orderly conduct of the proceedings, including proceedings of the committees. It presupposes, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the committees are in the standing orders, that the committees that are competently, that would competently look at a matter in-house, whether in plenary, whether committee of the whole House, or otherwise, must be found somewhere in the standing orders. I'm aware, Mr. Speaker, sir, that Committee of Ways and Means used to be here in the Assembly. In the 9th, up to 10th Parliament, I suppose, there was what we called Ways and Means. But with the new Constitution, the Committee of Ways and Means effectively became, one, the Committee of Supply, or Vote on Account. Supply to deal with budget and appropriation, and Vote on Account to deal with supplementaries. Now, means and way, the committees, the committees on supply and vote of account is found in Standing Order 240 and 241 and 147, 247 respectively. Mr. Speaker, sir, I've looked at the Standing Order, and I've served in this Assembly and the last Assembly in the Rules and Procedure Committee. I have never come across a departmental committee or a House committee called Ways and Means. Mr. Speaker, sir, I've also reflected on the law under which this legislation has been brought. And so one of the issues as I rise on a point of order is that, is this motion properly before us, and can we transact this as a Committee of Means and Ways? If we choose to transact it as Committee of Means and Ways, would the Speaker be urged to retire from his place to join us in Committee of the House and transact it as a committee? But more importantly, under what standing order? Number one. But two, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is Statutory Instruments Act. And I know there are senior members here, beginning with the Leader of Majority, and my friend Amos Kimonyo. And beside me is also one of the very strong members in this House, which I want to draw guidance, and I stand to be corrected on law. Mr. Speaker, sir, I think you are the doyen of these issues as we speak, having served in this House for quite some time. But I remember that we have had problems with statutory instruments in this House. You remember when we transacted Uwezo regulations, a big issue came, and it was decided that regulations must be dealt with in accordance with Statutory Instruments Act. Now, if you look at Statutory Instruments Act, the report to Parliament, that is section 15, the committee shall make a report to Parliament containing only the resolution. This is very important for me, Mr. Speaker, sir. Only a resolution that the statutory instrument that stands permanently referred to the committee be revoked. Be revoked. And together with that, section 18, annulment. When a report of statutory instrument has been tabled in Parliament, the statutory instrument shall be deemed to be annulled if Parliament passes a resolution to that effect. In other words, if this motion came as committee, and if this committee, the Finance Committee, whose report I see we are yet to debate, was considering this as a matter of Statutory Instruments Act, which they have the capacity and the law to do, they can only bring one motion. Motion to annul that legislation. They do not have to bring a motion to approve a motion. That is what we had with Uwezo. Because then, before we had looked at these issues properly, we were even approving so that we were helping the cabinet secretaries in drafting their regulations. And so, and I think there is, if I check properly, I will see communication from the chair, that the chair addressed and said that the only thing that can come as a matter of scrutiny from the Statutory Instrument Act is a motion to annul. What we have here is, Mr. Speaker, a motion to do certain things. It is a motion to approve. And so, if it is strictly according to Statutory Instrument Act, would it be in order that such a motion, which is not to approve, but which is not to annul, but to approve, would it be ordered before us? And lastly, Mr. Speaker, and everybody knows it, that we appropriate through finance bill. What this motion seems to do is to pull a medieval colonial legislation. And I've looked at the act. It was passed in 1959. And it was used only in 1960s. The last time it was used in this house was 1978. Now I have it here. No, I have it here, Mr. Speaker, before I am on my point of order. I've had it here and I've looked at the summary. Well, you see, Mr. Speaker, as a lawyer.
I think honorable members, just take notes of what the issues that Honorable Kajwang is raising, so that those of you who want to contribute to this, you will have an opportunity also to rebut.
Mr. Speaker, I have the act here. It is a one-page act. And for me as a lawyer, I don't have to get the history. I just look at it and I will see from the citation when acts of parliament have either annulled or, touched on this legislation. And the last time it was touched was when there was legal notice number 8 of 1978. And so Treasury, being the clever people they are, and trying to raise revenue, which they should, have pulled a legislation which was enacted in 1959 and has never been used till 1978 to try and see how to get money. I have no problem with raising money. The problem I have is the constitutionality by which we raise this money. And so, Mr. Speaker, sir, what I'm asking is this. If this legislation, if this order becomes the instrument by which we bring the money, then what we are doing is that we are using subsidiary legislation to circumvent an act of parliament. An act of parliament should be what then becomes what brings us the money under finance bill, but we are using a legislation or a subsidiary legislation through this act to be able to spring money. Mr. Speaker, sir, I will contribute if you rule that this motion is properly before us and requires debate. But the last thing, as I sit down, is, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is no law under either Income Act, Excise Duty Act, and VAT Act, and all those taxation laws for refund of money. And so the question I'm asking, all these monies which will be collected in the provisional period of time, and I'm thinking of money that will come through M-Pesas, Safaricom's, I'm thinking about the monies which will come through our ports, I'm thinking about the monies which will come through the airports, and all the money that will be collected. Where will this money go if it is not going to go into somebody's pocket? I am seeing a big, big vehicle of corruption that has never been seen, using a legislation, a colonial legislation, to try to get money which cannot be refunded and which will remain in somebody's pocket. Mr. Speaker, sir, I urged that you then can rule that this motion can be debated in some other way, but it is not properly before us in terms of law and the Constitution, in terms of Constitutional 2010, for us to debate. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable John Bandi, you want to comment on this?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I want to also make comments. I think what Honorable TJ Kajwang has raised are two fundamental issues regarding whether it is appropriate to have this motion before us. Mr. Speaker, I think Honorable TJ has raised the concern of whether the committee, because the question is that we are having Committee of Ways and Means. Yeah. That the question that Honorable Kajuang is asking is whether we have established Committee of Ways and Means as a House. That Article 124 of the Constitution clearly says that Parliament has to establish Committee of Ways and Means. So to me, I think that is the fundamental question that Honorable TJ is asking. The second one is asking the constitutionality of what we call the Provisional Collection of Taxes and Duties Act, whether it is still constitutional, whether the provisions of that act can still be applied in the current setup. I think those are two fundamental issues. And
maybe as revised, that chapter 415 enacted and came assented to on 3rd November 1959, commenced on the 17th of November 1959, as revised in 2015.
Yes, that whether it is still relevant in the current constitution. I think, Mr. Speaker, to address these two issues, I think the issue of Committee of Ways and Means, and I think we have the Honorable Amos Kimonya here, who really interacted a lot with the Committee of Ways and Means in the 10th Parliament and before, Honorable Duale and myself also from the backbench, that Committee of Ways and Means was actually just a committee to allow the Cabinet Secretary, then Minister, for Kenyans to be taxed, awaiting the finance bill. The rationale behind this and the reasoning behind this was very simple, Mr. Speaker, in my view, that if you specifically mentioned a date and Kenyans knew when this tax would apply, say on cigarettes, everybody would hold cigarettes up to that time. So I think in the wisdom of the people of Kenya, they decided to allow the minister to charge these taxes. Now the question is this Committee of Ways and Means still valid today in line with those changes that took place in that act, and reading it together, I think, with the sixth schedule to the Constitution. But, Mr. Speaker, there is another issue that I wanted to raise for your guidance on Standing Order number 49, regarding certain motions that may not be moved. Mr. Speaker, it says that no motion may be moved which is the same in substance as any question which has been received either in the affirmative, resolved either in the affirmative or in the negative, during the preceding 6 months in the same session. Mr. Speaker, just looking at this motion before us, and you can see that this motion will ask us to approve the provisional collection of taxes relating to income tax, value-added tax, excise duty. Mr. Speaker, just a few days ago, we dealt with the tax laws amendments bill. And some of the issues that we resolved are actually captured in some of these the provisions here. Like the value-added tax. I will give you an example of the value-added tax. Under the value-added tax, there were items which were supposed to be brought to exempt. And we resolved that they should remain as zero-rated. Mr. Speaker, now if through this provisional of taxes, we decide to approve that that KRA will continue collecting taxes, I'm a bit at a loss. I can see Honorable Kimunya is saying no, but I know, and I can read the items that I can see here, that I could quickly see. We have the tax on wheat and maize seeds, raw materials for manufacture of animal feed. These are actually now brought to exempt. And these are the same items that we removed from exempt to zero rating. No, but the House, the standing order says, once the House has resolved, it doesn't say that the President has assented to it. It says we have resolved either affirmative or negative. So are we going to make another resolution within 6 months, before the 6 months end? I know that resolution, that can occur with the concurrence of the Speaker. If the Speaker gives the go-ahead for that to be made, it's fine. But it should be explicitly clear, Mr. Speaker, that the Speaker of the National Assembly has expressly allowed this House to again make another resolution on the same issue. So, Mr. Speaker, as you consider the issue of TJ Kajwang with regards to those two fundamental concerns, that I would also urge that that is also incorporated, so that we don't have a point where we are in a point of confusion on which law would apply in the interim period. I know once we deal with the finance bill, everything will be clear. We will sort out these messes that we are in today. But these are also the prices to pay for. Maybe we need, as I finish, Mr. Speaker, allow me to say this, that I think the Treasury is also sleeping on the job. The Treasury needs to bring some amendments or propose amendments even to the Public Finance Management Act. Because again, in the Public Finance Management Act, I think Section 6, we have expressly stated that any law that is in conflict with the PFM Act, insofar as collection of taxes or application of revenue, or expenditure, the Public Finance Management Act overrides any other law. So we need to capture some of these things that are not so clear, so that the issue of the issue that TJ Kajwang has raised, Honorable Kajwang has raised, would have not come up if these matters were expressly stated in law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader Majority.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the first fundamental question that I need to answer is, do we have a law called Provisional Collection of Taxes and Duties as an Act of Parliament? The answer is in Chapter 415, Cap 415. That exists in our law, Mr. Speaker. And that's why, if you have that Cap 415, it says an Act of Parliament to give statutory effect for limited periods to order of the minister imposing any new taxes or duty rate of tax or duty, or creating new allowances, or altering or removing any existing tax or duty on any such rate of allowance. That law, Mr. Speaker, exists. And that law, Mr. Speaker, Honorable TJ Kajwang should have looked for how to amend that law. And that law, Mr. Speaker, if he listens to me and picks the Constitution, that law has been safeguarded in the 6th schedule of the Constitution. And if you have a Constitution, you just need to go to existing obligations, laws, and rights. And you go to number 7, which says, Mr. Speaker, all law in force immediately before the effective date of the Constitution continues in force and shall be construed with alteration, adaptation, qualification, and exceptions necessary to bring it into conformity with this Constitution. So Honorable TJ Kajwang first should have brought an amendment to that section in which the minister is drawing his powers from. Mr. Speaker, that is, the Speaker, if you can have time to listen. So, and Mr. Speaker, Section 2 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes and Duties Act of 415, the Speaker, reads, and I quote, and I really want the House to indulge me, because it's a bit long. If a bill is published in the Gazette, whereby if such bill were passed into law, any tax or duty or any rate, allowances, or administrative or general provision in respect thereof could be imposed, created, altered, or removed, the minister may, subject to this act, and notwithstanding the provisions of any other written law relating to taxes and duties, make an order that all or any specified provisions of the bill relating to taxes or duties shall have an effect as if the bill is passed into law. Mr. Speaker, the gist of the matter is that when the minister came to read the budget highlights and more so the tax-raising measures, the minister, using this law, said before the 90 days which Parliament is given, the National Assembly is given 90 days to pass the finance bill. Before the 90 days, the minister will use this provision in law to collect taxes subject to Parliament. If Parliament decides to do the finance bill in 2 weeks, following the public participation, it's well and good. He's saying, because these are part of his financing measures in the budget he read to the House, before you people conclude the completion of the finance bill, I will use this existing law. And Mr. Speaker, I have just read for Honorable T.J. Kajwang the provisions in the sixth schedule, which has even saved this law. So this law has been saved, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, to emphasize, in fact, in that Act Section 2 of the provision of collection of taxes and duties, CAR 415, the emphasis is on shall have effect as if the bill was passed into law. And this is the bill we are talking about, is a finance bill. And Mr. Speaker, those of us who are in the 10th Parliament, unfortunately, Honorable TJ was not in the 10th Parliament. But I'm sure Honorable Amos Kimunya, myself, and Honorable Sankok was still in college, and Honorable Leader of Minority, Mr. Speaker, were in the House. And Mr. Speaker, the Committee of Mr. Speaker, that we didn't have the Committee of Ways and Means, which was not accorded the House an opportunity. And Mr. Speaker, what is the essence, what is the rationale behind the Committee of Means and Ways? And I really want Honorable TJ to listen. The Committee of Ways and Means gives an opportunity to the House to discuss the budget speech. And secondly, it presents the House with an opportunity to approve the provisional collection of taxes and duties awaiting the passage of the finance bill. The minister has the powers, but this House, as a budget-making legislative chamber, the minister just needs our concurrence, Mr. Speaker. So he is getting the powers from the Constitution and from an Act of Parliament. And I really want, Mr. Speaker, maybe to draw your attention to the terminology of the Means and Ways, Committee of Means and Ways, Ways and Means. Is it like a committee of the House as provided for in the standing orders? Is it a terminology?
The title is Committee of Ways and Means. And this is the issue that the Honorable Kajwang has raised. But you know, the motion could still read approval of provisional taxation measures for the financial year 2018-2019. It will still be a valid motion without the title Committee of Ways and Means. Because it is true that the Honorable Kajwang says, yes, in the standing order, in fact, specifically standing order number 236, we have made reference to the Committee of Supply as being a committee of the whole House. Also quite true what the Leader Majority and the Honorable Kimunya have said, even the motion that Mr. Speaker do now leave the chair did not result in the Speaker leaving the chair at all. For those of you who may not have witnessed that, but it was just to allow the House to do exactly as the Honorable Kimunya has explained used to happen. But of course, there may be some other issues that would require some technical comments. because your House Business Committee noticed the lacuna that has been there over the last 5 years. In fact, perhaps those of you, like the Honorable T.J. Kajwang, the Honorable Makali Mulu, the Honorable Kimani Ichung'wa, and the rest of us, the Honorable Judy Jomo, Honorable Ashiali, several, Honorable Aluke, Honorable, who are in the 10th, Honorable Ngeno, Honorable Soipan, who are in the 10th, in the 11th Parliament, Honorable Amalo. I think we should all now be asking ourselves, what used to happen? How did it go? What your House Business Committee has insisted this financial year is for the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury to bring those instruments, and we want them to be considered by the House. But obviously, since everybody is now learning and realizing that there is something that has happened without anybody, without being intended, how then do we correct this situation? Indeed, the question that we should ask is, should the various legal notices that the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury as it should be referred to Committee on Delegated Legislation? And for me, the answer should be no. This instrument should be considered alongside the Finance Bill by the Finance Committee, because it is then that we will get a proper answer. Because a number of the measures that the minister has spelled out in his budget highlights are the ones, some of which he's trying to implement through those instruments using the authority of the Professional Collection of Taxes and Duties Act, which is saved in Section 7 of the 6th schedule. So there's no anomaly with that. But the Honorable Kajwang also is right when he raises the issue of the Article 124. You create standing orders. So we mentioned Committee of Supply in Standing Order 236, but it's not a committee like other committees. That has been explained by the Leader of Majority and Honorable Kimunya. It cannot be. It's not a committee that you can say the chair of the Committee on Selection, the Leader of Majority, is the Leader of Majority, together with his counterpart of minority, they sit and appoint members, because it's the entire House, indeed. So this obviously, titling, may have been an oversight even within our standing orders. And I like what the Honorable Kimunya said about the need, obviously, to keep revising our standing orders. But for me, the substance, so that we don't, if you go back to what you call the color of the goat and the skin or something like that, you remember some story like that in the past. The title, obviously, may, to the extent that it is not referred to in the standing orders, would appear to offend the requirements in Article 124. And therefore, to that extent, the Honorable Kajwang is right. But strictly speaking, approval of this professional collection of taxes and duties, what is it? In reality, it is approving the ways and means. Ways and means, that's what it means. Ways of raising taxes and the means. That's what essentially, and it is here, the authority asking me, Parliamentary Practice 24th edition, as revised in 2011, latest, I think. Yes, 24th edition. So the issue I think which we perhaps we need to at this point, because I want to agree with the Honorable Kajwang and more honorable members, there's also another fundamental point. In the Constitution, Article 94, Clause 5 says, no person, all body, other than Parliament, has power to make provision having the force of law in Kenya, except as authorized by the Constitution or by legislation. So even the minister or the cabinet secretary, that's the reason why he has to table his instruments, which he has. We insisted this for this financial year. We insisted. I want you to just jog your memories. Those of you who are in the 11th Parliament, it never happened. So we might also be accused of having slept. Not just might, actually. I think to be fair, we did not. But since these things keep coming up, and Treasury also, even Treasury itself has been caught unawares because they thought that it's their prerogative to just, because they are financial instruments, everybody, obviously, Parliament needs money, Judiciary needs money, so who can question this? But we are saying no, we want to follow the Constitution because those instruments have the effect of the force of law. And therefore, without the sanction of this House, they would then be offending Article 94(5). Then you move from that one, you go to Article 210, Clause 1, on taxation. It must be sanctioned by the Constitution or legislation. But to give effect to that now, what does your House Business Committee come up with? Because the House must claw back what seems to be, what appears to have been taken away by some other people. So you must look for a mechanism of bringing this to the House. Honorable Makali Mulu, if we can try to rationalize this, because the title is not the issue. I think we can agree with the fact that yes, title is not the issue, but we know the net effect of what it is that this motion seeks to achieve.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I must admit that this point of order raised by Honorable Kajwang is quite important. Actually, I'm sure majority of us have learned something from the debate. And when you look at what used to happen before the new constitution and what has happened after the new constitution, I think in terms of public finance management, Mr. Speaker, what we need to do is basically, you know, this law, when you look at it, it is quite a law which was enacted quite a long time ago. And I think what we need to do in the spirit of harmonizing all the laws with the new constitution, it would be important that a provision like what is being required here, if it can be factored into the Public Finance and Management Act, so that it's a straightforward matter, Mr. Speaker, that will help this country. Otherwise, as you are saying, during the 11th Parliament, we never heard of Committee of Supply or Committee of Ways and Means, and now that they seem to be really important and they're adding value to our work, what we need to do, Mr. Speaker, is possibly take up this challenge, do the necessary amendments, so that even as we do this next year, then it will be, in terms of constitutional requirement, it will be in order. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, is you realize, those of us who served in the 11th Parliament, in terms of raising resources, that is ways and means, the most important law was the Finance Act. And we didn't deal with this other act, so that now we are all learning. I think let's just take that challenge, Mr. Speaker. And since we amend all the laws ourselves, we need to now, and we're also in the process of amending the Public Finance and Management Act, we can actually take advantage of that opportunity and make sure that this kind of gap, which seems to be existing, that it can easily be captured and move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair Budgets.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, and I really don't want to belabor the point. And I can see that the Honorable TJ Kajwang was very keen listening to the former Minister for Finance, the Honorable Kimunya, who has clearly articulated the rationale behind such a motion. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to point out, even with the review of the Constitution in 2010, I think issues to do with public participation came in with the 2010 Constitution. And this motion is giving members of this House, and indeed the public, through their members of Parliament, a very good opportunity to interrogate the tax or the revenue-raising measures through taxation that the minister did propose during his revenue-raising measures statement while reading here. And it gives us an opportunity as a House to now start speaking the feelings of the people out there. For instance, Honorable Speaker, I've had very many concerns with the additional charges on M-Pesa, RTGS transactions, and all the other revenue-raising measures that impact on our taxes, including some issues on VAT. And therefore, we are being afforded an opportunity. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, I would want to agree with Honorable Kimunya and the leader of majority. I wish this motion had even come earlier, not at a time like this when we're about to go on recess. You can see, Honorable Speaker, we are not so many people in the House, but it is a very good opportunity for members of Parliament and even members of the public to be able to understand what are the provisions that the minister is proposing in terms of taxes that will affect the life of Kenyans. Honorable Speaker, one old man way back in London once said that a country that is trying to grow into prosperity by overtaxing itself is equivalent to somebody standing inside a bucket and trying to lift himself using the handle of that bucket. And therefore, it will be a very good opportunity for us as members of Parliament and for the public to be able to clearly interrogate the tax-raising measures that the minister has proposed, so that even way before the Chair of Finance tables brings his report on the finance bill, we have been able to engage members of the public, even as we go on recess, to be able to get the feelings of Kenyans on the issues that touch on them on matters to do with taxation. Two, I think the most important thing is that this is only, the act itself speaks for just a short period of time, up to the time that the finance bill is enacted into an act of Parliament. And therefore, we have also as a House, remember, a few weeks ago when we passed the budget estimates here, we passed that budget on the basis that that budget will be financed through certain tax measures. And if we don't allow the minister to have those tax measures to be able to raise the revenues to finance that budget, then, as the Honorable Speaker says, the judiciary, ourselves as Parliament, the executive, everybody in government will not be able to get access money, since there will be no money being raised. And therefore, and considering the issues that are there with revenues, I think it's very important, Honorable TJ Kajwang, that we allow the minister to have the opportunity to raise taxes even before the enactment of the Finance Act. And also for us as members of Parliament to speak to the issues that are of concern to Kenyans on matters touching on taxation. Because taxation, Honorable Speaker, is a very sensitive matter. Kenyans feel that they're overtaxed in some areas, and therefore this also offers that opportunity to be able to speak to those issues even before the Chair of Finance brings his bill for debate and the report for debate. With that, Honorable Speaker, I would beg, of course, reading from your body language, I could tell, I can estimate which direction we are about to take. And I think it's a good opportunity for this House to be able to now speak to the real issues touching on taxation of our people and how we will raise revenues to finance that budget whose estimates we just passed in this House a few weeks ago. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
I see, oh gosh. No, I see Honorable Wamalwa and I see Professor Adwar. Can I give you, please, don't take more than 3 minutes, please.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And I want to thank Honorable Kajwang for bringing this up so that we can learn from the good experience of Honorable Kimunya. Some of us, Mr. Speaker, in the last Parliament, we never saw these things of Committee of Supply and Committee of Ways and Means. But I want to thank that Committee of Supply, the one that we've just done before the budget estimates. It provided a very good opportunity of scrutinizing, and it gave us an opportunity to feel that it's true we're in a presidential system, and indeed this one is a budget-making house as compared to the last term. Mr. Speaker, my question is this. Listening to Honorable Kimunya, he mentioned about this issue of Committee of Ways and Means that is going to be provisional. So in other words, when we are going to debate the finance bill and we pass, if we are going to annul some of the issues here, what is likely to happen? Because he mentioned provisional, so I wanted to see that transition, because it's just for, it's a gap measure. But very soon, we'll be having the finance bill, which we're going to debate, and some of us like who are very uncomfortable, particularly the exercise on M-Pesa sending money. Absolutely. So what happens? Because if we are going to annul and something that we've passed in this provisional, which one is going to take precedence? And when I was listening to John Buddy here, my minority leader, he mentioned about the issue of the standing order, whereby he had talked over, if a house has passed a resolution, you cannot bring back that motion within the time frame of 6 months. And reflecting back in the last parliament, I think it was something on zero taxation or something where there was an outcry. And I remember you exercised your standing order 1, and it was brought back. And actually we debated and reviewed. So I also have expected you to have mentioned something, because he had said, though he left, but I was taking notes, that how do we bring this? And just the other day, the House had a resolution on something pertaining this. So as you conclude, maybe, you can also maybe touch on that, because this is continuous learning. And I want to thank Amos Kimunya, because he really brought it out very well. And that's why some of us, you can see, we are settled, we are listening keenly. Of course, Honorable Majority Leader, he's always also on top of things, you know. I saw him, even him going through. Thank you, Honorable Kajwang, and others who have contributed as we move on. I thank you.
I wanted Honorable Kajwang to be the last one, so I want to give Professor Aduol.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity, and I also want to say that indeed this has been a very profound and useful learning experience. I want to thank Honorable TJ Kajwang, Honorable Amos Kemunya, the Majority Leader. Mr. Speaker, the point that I wanted to raise is really to link in line with what Honorable Amala has indicated. And it was in line with a submission that I had made when we were in the House looking at the Tax Laws Amendment Bill 2018. And Mr. Speaker, it was really to find out whether in terms of what we would now be engaging in, we would be going back on what we had agreed as a House with regards to reclassification of supplies from zero-rated to exempt status to increase domestic funds. I would also want to ask, Mr. Speaker, that as we get to determine this matter, the issue that was raised by Honorable Mbadi, because we as a House were quite indeed happy when the the committee had realized that if we were to reclassify zero-rated to exempt, we were going to bring untold challenges with regards to VAT on items such as medicine, such as cooking gas, such as milk, such as flour, and a number of issues that would affect the vulnerable groups. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking in particular because I feel that it would be clear that if there is indeed provision that we wouldn't be able to go back, if it's a matter that we just discussed before 6 months are over, that we would need to look into this, and that we would, by virtue of looking even at Article 94 on the role of Parliament, remember that our legislative authority, even when we derive and interpret, is really derived from the people of Kenya, and that as we choose to interpret and what we do, Mr. Speaker, I remember during induction, and I took that as you told us, that whatever legislation we make should be either reflecting to the aspirations of the people or would be seen to directly seek to solve problems that we experience. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to say that I truly find that this is very illuminative, very useful, but I would want to be sure that we are not going back on what we clearly indicated if we were to legislate would affect particularly women, the vulnerable people, and those in informal areas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Honorable Kajwang, please.
Mr. Speaker, sir, when I rose to urge this issue, I mentioned that you are the doyen in these issues, and you have just proved it. Because, Mr. Speaker, you have opened my eyes to something I didn't see, that the Committee of Ways and Means that is in the order paper is perhaps a description of how the table or the leader of majority may have wished his motion to be, not necessarily that we were either going to recline into a committee. And I have also reflected on Article 159, so that procedure should not have a preeminence over substance. And I think that these are issues that we need to bring up when and if they arise. First of all, Mr. Speaker, sometimes I'm amazed that members are not in this house when now we transact business. They are here when we transact sideshows. But when now we are now transacting business, you don't see members in the assembly. Because these are the things that make us legislators. But Mr. Speaker, sir, I think that in doing the best we can, we may have gotten in a few things that we need to disentangle ourselves on. One is this question of Statutory Instrument Act, in which then we say that an instrument, when it comes before us, should only come to us if we are annulling, not if we are approving. We have had that debate before, and I think there has been legal advice on the issue, so that, for example, an instrument such as this has been considered within the realms of the Statutory Instruments Act and should have come as a motion. In fact, going by Statutory Instrument Act, perhaps the committee should have just written to the Cabinet Secretary and allowed them to go on with what they're doing, because then that is approving. Only if it was annulling, then it would come before us for debate. But I also want to tell my friend, Honorable Kemunya, whom I really learn a lot from. This only disadvantage is that he was not in the House when we were implementing many of these statutes for the time that he had the health break. But Mr. Speaker, sir, you see, the problem is that when you have practice and traditions, but if those practice and traditions are against the statute or the Constitution, then the Constitution and the statute takes precedence before the statutes, before the tradition. So I think this is a challenge to us in Rules and Procedure Committee to relook at the standing orders and perhaps to mention means and ways the way we have mentioned the supply, but again also the guys who are in the finance to consider and the members of the committee, members who are in the finance committee, to consider relooking at this archaic legislation and see how we can do finance bill, even if we were to sleep in this chamber. We sleep here and go get it done and get Kenyans something with which they can now pay their tax in a bill, not pursuant to an order which has not been considered properly by members of the country in terms of public participation and so on. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your guide, and I have nothing useful to add.
Maybe because I've just noticed that a member for Kibwezi West and placed an intervention. He's also just all of us guilty for noticing this anomaly this late.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you for this opportunity. More important is that I think these are things which we had discussed over even in the 11th Parliament. My concerns are pretty straightforward, because what is being called to question is, does an act, a law, lapse? We have a Finance Act of 2017. The Finance Act mandates Treasury to collect taxes in a defined way, which was passed by this House. And more fundamentally, the power to collect or the budget-making process is solely the purview of Parliament. Otherwise, only where Article 114 checks in, where we're trying to propose bills or measures, this is when we go into consultations with the Cabinet Secretary. And in so discussing, the primal point that is being raised is that Kenya is always an entity which is going concern. As such, when we're looking at these things of Committee of Ways and Means and saying that we want to mandate particular taxes to be collected, my biggest concern is when you look at 4, which is miscellaneous fees and levies. Yeah. Because this is the only thing which is being carried over from the previous budget cycle to this particular one. And those are issues which are going to be before the finance committee and indeed this House in determining to what extent are we enshrining the rights which are within Chapter 4, which are economic and social rights, the principles of taxation, which require taxes to be just, to be equitable, to be representative. And as our colleague spoke about, when you're looking at what our mandate is in the House, is to ensure that everything that we pass is in the interest of the people of the Republic of Kenya. So, and taxes, as was ably raised by Honorable Ishungwa, are very, very sensitive. And especially when there are loopholes being created, and I'll take that back, that word loophole. A scenario is being created where corporate Kenya can come out and say in the next 90 days, or even in just 30 days, be able to collect monies from the public. That might not necessarily end up in treasury. This is a very salient thing, because by the time we come and evaluate, we report our taxes on a yearly basis and pay, anticipatory taxes on a quarterly basis. That is the same period and to which some of these levies, which are going to take in effect immediately, will come through. So, Mr. Speaker, as we address, and I know there are a lot of things to review, and that I welcome, but I think I would want to urge caution that we should not pass this particular act because Treasury is already mandated to collect money. I don't think there's anyone who's going to go to court.
It will still have stand, and the Speaker cannot use the standing order number 1 because standing order number 1 only applies where there is no clear express provision. The other issue is, of course, what is contained in Article 210, Clause 1, no tax or fees or levies may be levied or adjusted or varied, except as provided for by legislation. Fortunately, as the Honorable Kimunya quite, in my opinion, ably and clearly explained, this proposal, as contained in the speech which gave highlights of the budget, unless we didn't look at, we didn't have, I don't know whether members had an opportunity to look at the speech. It contained ways and means. Strictly speaking, that speech, because the House had already dealt with supply. You had already said this, given Parliamentary Service Commission so much, given the other ministry this, you are supplying. The House was supplying. But having supplied, you also have a responsibility to approve the ways and means of raising that which you purported to have supplied. Otherwise, there will be nothing to supply. I mean, you cannot eat your cake and have it. I mean, it must be really that straight and forward. That it is not possible that you sit and supply, and then you say, no, we will not approve ways and means. Then you will have to come back here and recede. You now have to use standing order 49. You come and recede all the resolutions that you made in supply. Because what were you supplying? Unless you are telling the cabinet secretary, please go out there in the wild and beg. That which we are coming to supply. Well, I don't want to use the word used by the member for Kikuyu, the chair of budget. He just whispered something which will not be good for a house to go by. Because, so indeed, even as I appreciate the point raised by the Honorable Kajwang that in a debate of this nature, we should have almost a near house full. Because these ways and means, unless people understand, they will come and vote without, first of all, realizing that they have already supplied. So Some of the ways and means proposed may appear unpopular out there in the streets or in the villages. We saw some of those reactions even yesterday. They may be unpopular. Taxation has never been popular anywhere in one district. If anybody got a chance not to pay taxes, they would be the happiest people to just live like that. So it's a painful thing, but the responsibility still rests with this House for this republic to either approve or disapprove. So that then, if you don't approve sufficient resources as to match what you have supplied or purport them to supply, because if then they are not sufficient, then you must also provide, come up with ways, other ways and means of raising the shortfall. I mean, so, but anyway, honorable members, for me, because of Section 7 in the 6th schedule of the Constitution, the Professional Collection of Taxes and Duties Act 1959, as revised in 2015, is still the law that anchors professional collection of taxes. And in terms of the PFM Act 2012, until such time as the finance bill will have been passed into law to become an act. So to a very large extent, really, and that is contained in the speech and the various instruments that have been tabled before this House after gazettement, as required under the Statutory Instruments Act. And I think also it is good we familiarize ourselves with what that Statutory Instruments Act says. That a statutory making, an instrument making body is allowed to publish in the Gazette. And those instruments, once gazetted, and within 7 days from the date of gazettement, I think it's important that we all familiarize ourselves with that. Within 7 days, tabled before the National Assembly. Once within 7 days they have been tabled, they assume the force of law because they have the authority of the Statutory Instruments Act until annulled. And anything done on the authority of those instruments, please, go and just check. Anything done on the authority of those instruments until annulled is legal and lawful. And that's the point I think the Honorable Kajwang was raising with regard to the statutory instruments. And it's for that reason that I would myself redirect those instruments, which are all finance related, because they relate to ways and means, that they should be considered by the Departmental Committee on Finance and Planning, because it's the same committee that is considering the finance bill, which according to the PFM Act 2012 has to be passed by this House within 90 days after the appropriations bill is assented to, becomes an act, and it was assented to on Friday last week. So from Friday last week, we have 90 days within which to pass the finance bill. Do public participation. Otherwise, that public participation is assumed in the saving clause, Section 7 in the 6th schedule. It is deemed to have happened, even in this law which was enacted in 1959, as revised in 2015, because they are saved. And they are to be interpreted with variations and adaptations as are necessary. If you look at that Section 7, as are necessary and in conformity with the Constitution. So, unlike in the past, and I'm sure Honorable Kimunya and indeed the Honorable Leader Majority will recall, even both the 10th, all the parliaments beyond the 11th, the finance bill used to take close to 6 months. In fact, almost invariably, It used to be one of those last bills passed before the House goes on the long recess, Christmas holidays. But at least the PFM Act has reduced that period to 90 days from the date that the Appropriations Act is enacted. So I am directing that debate on this motion be stood down. And in the meantime, the Finance Committee of the House considers the various statutory instruments that have been gazetted by the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and table a report. Because unless they are annulled, anything done on their authority as they are now is covered by the Statutory Instruments Act. And you see, that is what saves the public participation, because public participation is expected to happen within now the committees of the House. So, Honorable Limo, who is present, the chair of Finance Committee, you have an onerous task to look at those various instruments and table your report, even as you also engage the public in considering or presenting views on generally many of the other ways and means contained in the finance bill as published. In fact, it is published in your name. So, honourable members, I think we start down this debate, but I think it has been very healthy. It's been very healthy, and indeed, as we said, since the enactment, the promulgation of the new constitution, there have been many things that people have been changing, because you realize that, yes, Asking May says that money resolutions, especially ways and means, just as Kitty says in this provisional collection, it is provided for. It is there. But again, as Honorable Kajwang has stated, traditions, customs, practice cannot supersede the grand norm, particularly the Constitution. And neither can they supersede specific provisions of legislation. So I think for all of us, indeed for the country, we actually, this House is trying to help the National Treasury because, and remember, the last 5 years, the statutory instruments have never been deemed to have been approved by you. They have been deemed to have been approved because those gazette notices were always issued and taken through, dumped into some offices around Parliament. So you are deemed to have been passing, even Honorable Patrick Musimba, you are deemed to have been passing them, Honorable Manso, you passed all of them.